Good morning, everyone. This is the Public Policy and Public Administration panel for the New York State Political Science Association annual meeting in 2022. My name is Roxana Toma. I'm panel chair and discussant and also section chair for Public Policy and Public Administration. And I'm welcoming five papers on today's panel. And again, my hope is that we'll make this as interactive as possible. Discussion coming from all parts. So we'll go alphabetically. Please introduce yourself and then, walk us through your presentation. Osvaldo?
Hi, good morning. I'm Osvaldo Mena Aguilar. I am a PhD in political science student at the program in the Graduate Center at the City University of New York. Great to be here.
Welcome.
Should I start?
Absolutely, please.
Okay, I'm gonna be sharing my screen. So are you able to see it?
Yes, if you could do excellent. Yes, beautiful.
Great. So I'm going to go real quick about what got my attention about this topic, what the research question is, and hypothesis. What I am studying in this paper is a bill that modified the tax system in Mexico in 2013. This was a tax bill that I deem it progressive, meaning that it taxed those earners who earn more income higher. It modified the tax system in a progressive way. And the reason I was interested in this passage of a bill was because those progressive tax bills that were attempted in the past, even at the height of Mexico's authoritarian system, Mexico was under an authoritarian political one-party rule for over 70 years. And even at the height of those authoritarian presidentialism, highest powers in three progressive tax bills were defeated in 1953, 61, and 72. Also, a bill that was attempted by the first democratically elected president, who was elected from the center to right party PAN in 2000. A regressive bill that was attempted by that president in 2001 was thwarted as well, this time because of the opposition of the former authoritarian party PRI and the left to center party PRD. So my research question is, how did a progressive tax bill manage to pass Congress and get enacted in 2013? And why was it proposed by PRI in the first place? If at the height of its authoritarian powers, it could manage to pass a progressive tax bill, and if the change in the conditions, in the democratic condition, weren't conducive to another tax bill in 2001, how did this tax bill manage to pass floor? And my hypothesis, and hopefully what I will show you in a couple of minutes, is that given Congress composition in 2012, and given PRD and PAN lack of internal cohesion, the only legislative cohesion partner for any tax bill to survive was PRD, which is a party left to center, and thus the only alternative was to pass a progressive kind of bill. And as I was mentioning, PRD would only join if it was a progressive bill. For any kind of bill to survive, the only coalition partner available was that of the center to left to center. Thus, it had to be a progressive tax bill. I am looking at two theoretical frameworks to try to analyze which one is more suitable to this case. One is Paul Sabatier's advocacy coalitions, which basically holds that policy change involves strategic struggle once an opportunity is presented by external shocks, but this change is possible because it is promoted by an advocacy coalition, which has at the core a belief system. Once that an opportunity presents a contest of belief systems, one could see policy change. The other theoretical framework that I'm looking at is John Kingdom's multiple streams, which holds that public policy process is much less purposeful, even not necessarily rational. and that policy process feeds from three separate streams which are independent. One that he names problems, one that he names proposals or alternatives, and one that he names politics. Policy change will occur only if these streams are successfully coupled at what he calls critical junctures or windows of opportunity. So there's a similarity in the notion of windows of opportunity, critical junctures, or external shocks in both frameworks. So at first, I would start analyzing why was this tax bill needed in the case of Mexico? Why was it a problem in the first place? And very quickly, just to show you that Mexico is a chronic under revenue collector. In 2013, the year in which the bill was passed, it collected only 9.5% of its GDP in tax revenue, below even Latin Americans' average of 16.4, and way below OECD 21% of GDP tax collection. It's a massive chronic under revenue collector. This has changed. The figure on the right, it's 2019. Mexico has now collects 16.5% of its GDP, but it is still under Latin America and OECD's average. One of the most important reasons about why this has happened, there's a vast theoretical literature that holds that if there is the availability of a natural resource, that would thwart the need to develop a tax system. And that had been the case of Mexico, which used to have large oil reserves, but that has been changing dramatically in the past 20 years. On the left-hand side, you can see that both oil production and reserves of hydrocarbons have been declining at a fast rate. So that source of revenue has stopped being relevant. It is still relevant, but it has decreased its potential for revenue. And of course, low revenue collection translates into low public spending. Both considering total public spending as a percentage of the GDP, Mexico is under similar Latin American nations such as Chile or Argentina. It only spends 18.3% of its GDP as compared, for example, to Chile, Uruguay, Colombia. And it also it's below public social spending, all due to its problem in revenue collection. Also, the tax system in Mexico and spending in Mexico have very little potential to decrease inequality. You can see here the variation in the Gini index after taxes and spending, and what happens after taxes and spending from the government is considered is that very little change in inequalities it's accomplished compared to similar developing nations. So one of the reasons that the literature considers about why is policy change difficult in the first place, it has to do with the presidential system and the possibility that has for ingrained deadlock. Here, I just very quickly wanna mention that after those 70 years that pre-ruled and was ousted by PAN in 2000, no single party has been able to secure a majority in Congress ever since. However, 77% of all presidential initiatives have been approved. And this to show that deadlock, despite much heralded deadlock ingrained within presidential systems, this has not been the case in Mexico, as in many other presidential systems, due to the fact that there are many possibilities regarding the electoral system, party discipline, in which legislative coalitions can be built. This has been the case of Mexico. 77% of all presidential initiatives, as I've been mentioning, have been approved. And one quick thing that I want to point is that the most recurrent legislative coalition since a democratic transition has been that of PRI and PAN, those parties centered right to center, and the most common legislative coalition has excluded the left to center party PRD. That's the figure on the bottom side of this slide. However, despite the fact that deadlock has not occurred and there have been alternatives for public policy to change, as I was mentioning, tax modifications in the tax system have been hard. As I was mentioning, those attempts made during the height of the authoritarian presidentialism were defeated. And I argue in the paper that conflict has not much about acknowledging the problem. The problem has been acknowledged in several and different tax bill initiatives, the problem of low chronic on the revenue collection. But the problem has been chiefly among the selection between alternatives, either raise taxation via more progressiveness on income taxes, or raise it via indirect taxes over consumption, via the value-added tax in the so far excluded categories of groceries and medicines. In Mexico, there is a value-added tax in all categories except groceries and medicines, and this has to do with the fact that those categories have been proven to be regressive on the poorest people, as those people devote the largest share of their incomes in groceries and medicine. Thus, even if rich people spend more on the absolute in groceries and medicines, setting a value-added tax on those categories will have this problem of being regressive. Just quickly to mention that the first democratically elected president in 2000 attempted the following year to pass a tax bill. The most important thing that this bill wanted to accomplish was to impose a value-added tax over medicines and groceries, and it was defeated mostly because PRI opposed. As I mentioned before, given the recurrent composition in Congress, the key coalition partner in all legislatures have been the formerly authoritarian party, PRI. Thus, any bill that has been defeated has been because it lacked the support of PRI. In 2003, President Fox had made a second attempt. This time, some items of his tax bill were approved, but the attempt to apply VAT over medicines and groceries was once again defeated. Once again, because PRI opposed. In 2012, after 12 years of rule by right to center party ban, Enrique Peña Nieto took PRI back to presidential office. The next day, he announced a broadly legislative agenda, illy defined, very non-specific, but a broad legislative agenda that was signed by the three most important parties, PRI, PAN, and PRD. The three most important parties committed to a broad legislative agenda that within its tenets had to a commitment to increase and simplify taxation. At that moment, when it was announced, it was just this announcement to make an attempt to increase and simplify taxation, but no specifics were considered. One important fact is also that PRI secured a 42% plurality in both chambers, which meant that it needed coalition partners to pass these bills. And very quickly to mention the iterations that the tax bill of 2013 had to show the inner dynamics of the politics stream. This bill was very different from the first time it was announced, from when it was introduced at the floor of Congress, and with the one that was eventually passed. In March 2013, PRI modified its internal statutes, which previously banned the party from supporting VAT on foods and groceries and medicines. As I was mentioning, the two times that that party PAN attempted to modify this, pre-opposed, it had within its statutes a deliberated provision to support such measures. But in March 2013, it modifies its internal statutes. Therefore, everyone was expecting that the attempt to introduce a tax bill would be in the same direction that previous parties, the PAN party had attempted. However, the bill that was introduced in September had no mention about VAT on food and groceries and medicines, and instead it had this progressive considerations to increase the upper bound income tax rate from 30 to 32%, to impose for the first time a tax rate on 10% on realized gains, capital gains on income, to increase VAT over sugary soft drinks, and to reduce allowances and cap tax credits. That was the bill that was introduced in September, that was approved by the House of Representatives. However, due to a very visible, very militant opposition from the private sector, and from that entailed lobbying, that entailed mobilizations in the capital, that entailed massive displays in media. The only thing that was dropped from this bill was that the proposed value-added tax over the acquisition of property, mortgage payments, and private school tuition were dropped, but all the other progressive considerations of the bill were approved. With this characterization of the three phases of this bill, what I wanted to contend is that the notion of Paul Sabatier's that there is a deep core of beliefs within an advocacy coalition pushing for public policy change might not be suitable to this public policy change, because I would contend rather that it was the highly ideological flexibility of PRI that allowed this bill to be modified and eventually passed. And one thing that was crucial is that PRD support was the only available coalition partner for this bill to pass, and thus that can explain why it became a progressive bill. Given PRI's ideological flexibility, it could modify the bill in that direction. Why did PRI attempt a progressive tax reform? Because its former coalition partner previously, as I was mentioning, the most recurrent legislative coalition in past legislatures had been that of PAN and PRI. But at this instant, PAN was either unwilling or unable to provide any alternative whatsoever for a tax bill to occur. That is because it lacked internal cohesion. One fraction of the party of the PA1 opposed collaboration within this broad legislative agenda that I mentioned that was nicknamed Pacto por Mexico, Pact for Mexico. And this fraction of the party, as it was opposed to that agreement, opposed also the signaling of imposing VAT over groceries and food, even if that very same party had applauded and attempted to pass that reform in the past. This time, one fraction of that party opposed that notion when it was signaled in March 2013. However, when the bill was introduced in September and shown to be progressive, all PAN representatives and senators opposed fiercely the bill in both houses and voted against it. So if PAN was unwilling to provide an alternative because it was internally fractured, for any taxation bill to pass, the content needed to be progressive because the only coalition partner available was PRD. And why did PRD supported the bill? Because the PRD leadership decision to join Pacto por Mexico, this broad legislative agenda, also had fractured the party. The former charismatic presidential candidate Andrés Manuel López Obrador and current president of Mexico split from the party with his support, which meant that also half of PRD's representatives and senators voted against all bills introduced by PRI. Thus, I argue that PRD leadership was gambling. It had the incentive to sort of accomplish a very visible progressive outcome to prove that its decision to join Pacto por Mexico had been a successful gamble in a left-wing direction. So to sum it up, the 2013 tax bill was a successful coupling of alternatives and problems, but that was deeply reliant on the politics stream, as John Kingdom is mentioning, that occurred within a window of opportunity. The first window of opportunity was the internal division of the right party PAN, and the second window of opportunity is the internal division of PRI. The first internal division made PRD the only available coalition partner, and the second division within PRD made a part of this party, its leadership, very willing to collaborate with PRI to accomplish and manage to pass what could be categorized as a progressive outcome of this broad legislative agenda. One factor that was also very important was PRI's ideological flexibility and its willingness to either try and attempt one way of introducing a regressive tax bill, as in which when it signaled that it would go after VAT over groceries and medicines, but also its willingness to go in the opposite direction once it was proven that PNA was unwilling or unable to provide any alternative. So with that, I thank you for your attention and be very thankful for your comments.
Thank you very much, Osvaldo. And I'm sorry I'm limiting people on time because I noticed you were talking fast to make sure we don't go over time. So thank you very much. I enjoyed reading your paper. Um, I'm curious, why did PRI, forgive me, uh, why why did it have in its statutes um, uh, to oppose the VAT on groceries and medicine?
PRI, as a party that emerged out of Mexico's revolution in 1910, has characterized itself as a social democrat party. Actually, it is inscribed within the Social Democratic International Alliance. But so for most of his history, its ideological commitment was a sort of nationalist, statist, developmentalist nature. That took a massive turn in 1918 as that party was heading the neoliberal turn on privatization. And so even though it had an ideological statute and an ideological sort of populist outlook, most of the policies it had enacted since 1988 had been in the same direction that the Right to Center Party planned. They are very close ideologically in practice in the bills they have tried to accomplish, and that is shown in the legislative coalitions that have been recurrent. Those two parties have voted most of the time together, even despite the fact that it's sort of external ideological dressing, for lack of a better word, is that of being social democrat.
Okay, so basically at its core, it wanted to protect the working class, if you.
I would say that at its discursive core, yes. At its discursive core, they still, at times when it is politically, when it helps politically, so they sort of remind people of these commitments to the working class. But in practice, it has voted mostly within a privatizing agenda.
Absolutely, I understand. I also liked how you started your paper with Gutierrez article, and my advice is that you just make it more, like, you bring that more front and center in the conclusions, because that, I think that's a very strong point. The paper is long, and it would help if you could kind of like clarify along the way, just kind of remind the reader, with transitional paragraphs, what you're saying, that, listen, it's multiple streams. It's essentially, Osvaldo, what you did in this presentation. You took a much broader, right, piece of writing, and you had to, essentially amass it into a much shorter presentation. And that just clarified the skeleton, the roadmap, the main points you're taking. So if you could take some of that to your paper, it would just, again, make it even more clear. I also appreciated, and I would invite you to repeat this, the ideological flexibility, right? So I thought that was very important. Any comments from any questions, any feedback, any comments from the viewers?
I appreciated you setting the context for the problem at the beginning. I mean, I know nothing about this, so that was very helpful.
Thank you. Thank you.
Anybody else? I think, like I said, Osvaldo, this is a good piece of work, and if you just, cosmetic changes, if you just so like bring to the front and center, remind the reader what you're not necessarily what the issue is, but what you're also taking issue, what you're explaining, would just make it even more powerful. And it's fascinating, like you said, how something that was essentially regressive, right, turned out to, to become a progressive tax bill. And it was ideological flexibility and multiple streams, right, and critical junctures and windows of opportunity that were seized, essentially, and strong theoretical background by all means. So congratulations, and I think this is rich.
Thank you very much for your comments to everyone and for your attention. I'm sorry I was going, I'm a fast talker, sorry about that, but thank you very much for your attention.
Oh, no problem at all. It went very well. I believe next is Balazs.
Can you hear me? It's okay.
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to thank for this opportunity to share with you my conceptual thoughts. My contribution will be completely theoretical, so be prepared for it. Yeah. My name is Roman Balazs. I am an assistant professor at the Department of Social Policy and Social Work at Masaryk University in the Czech Republic. And I will share with you my screen. So. Can you see it?
Perfect. Yes, I can see it.
And it moves?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's okay. So this is structure of my presentation, and I go to problem first. So social workers no longer hold a position of mere social deliverers, but actively enter policy arenas and advocate the interests of their clients, disadvantaged people. There is the assumption that they are actively involved in policy arenas and effectively engage in policymaking. Although current research on the policy practice of social work policy entrepreneurs reveals an array of inspiring ways to realize policy practice in diverse nation states, one crucial aspect of policy engagement is overlooked. This crucial aspect is power. Power is an omnipresent element that determines the success or failure of social workers promoting policy changes. Since being a vague term, power is often mistaken or conflated with force, authority, influence, knowledge, or domination over resources. In terms of power, there is a gap in policy practice research, the lack of appropriate theorizing of power in policy practice. In my contribution, I will answer the question, what is power and how can it be utilized for research on policy engagement of social workers? Social workers occupy positions subordinated to the various government of municipal departments and provide social work in diverse fields, such as health, employment, education, justice, and safety. It is not surprising that other professionals who dominate the particular field challenge social work professional knowledge and abilities. Professionals such as physicians and nurses, lawyers, teachers, and policy officers. Another point to consider is the employment of social workers. The state, private bodies, or NGOs employ social workers, and these various organizational environments produce various organizational imperatives to be implemented into the social work practice. So it can be seen that social work's institutional and organizational settings are full of complexity, blurred boundaries, overlapping authorities, variable difficulties, and changeable opportunities. The power of social workers arises in these settings. Power is probably one of the most ambiguous and vague terms in social science. Scholars and practitioners treat power differently, and its meaning is changeable. Every field, such as political science, political philosophy, sociology, economics, or anthropology, or every school, such as elitism, pluralism, Marxism, corporatism, professionalism, is based on diverse foundations and emphasizes various aspects of reality when defining power. Many authors have accompanied the term power with prepositions trying to highlight the specificity of their meaning. Thus, we have power to, power with, power over, or power within. In my contribution, I will leave prepositions out and start with the question, what is power? Following Hannah Arendt, I can say that power is not something tangible. Power is a ubiquitous potential that springs up when people interact. As such, power is situational, relational, changeable, and unpredictable entity, a potential, potency, or capacity. It is something that helps people overcome significant obstacles in particular settings. It refers to something that can modify or alter the world through our actions. It needs to be actualized through interactions among people. Power is neither just a chance to enforce our will against the will of others, as Weber said, nor ascendancy over resources, agendas, or ideational components of reality creation. I believe that power cannot be possessed. Power is not permanently negotiated, given, and taken in social interactions among people. In my usage, power is a social worker's situational, relational, changeable, and unpredictable potency or capacity to promote desired changes. A potency or capacity given by actors in interactions. Holding the definition, we should not confuse power with authority, knowledge, force, influence, status, etc. These are power differentials, or more precisely, specifically mixed attributes of a particular actor in a particular institutional and organizational context. It is obvious that the concept of power itself is not very helpful in explaining the reality of political competition among actors in the social work institutional structure delineated above. What needs to be done in that matter is to shift our attention to power relations. Following Whitehead, I understand power relations as a competition among construction of power based on perception of power symbols. The other is situational seen as powerful when, and only when, one acknowledges his or her potential capacity to promote desired changes. In interactions, power is exhibited through symbols such as muscular figure, a gun, a suit, a title or degree, and articulacy or wealth. Given the uneven distribution of power among actors, power relations are characterized by an asymmetry in the perceived potential capacity among actors. When the actor is perceived as powerful, he or she becomes endowed with power. Considering Latour's work, I can add that different manifestations of power significantly influence the actual actions of actors. What matters is not what one can really change, but what is believed in one's capacity to promote changes. I can illustrate the nature of power relations in a situation where actor A and B interact. Each of them carries specific attributes, which we can understand here as power differentials. They are both physically constituted in some way, hold a certain job position, have a certain education, enjoy a certain authority, earn a certain reputation, and have a certain access to resources. Both of them are bearers of two specific configurations of power differentials, manifesting themselves through power symbols. As such, both actors perceive the other as specifically powerful. The situational context of their interaction contains a specific mix of the so-called conversion factors that cause, for example, the symbol of actor A can prevail. Consequently, actor B acknowledges actor A's potential capacity to change something and submit, which is the act of power endowing. It is reasonable to consider the described social work institutional setting to be complex. Besides social workers and their organizations, many other professionals and organizations enter policy arenas, knowledge platforms, interprofessional networks, or teams. All of them are interested in promoting their ideas. There is no transparent and steady actor A and actor B competition, but rather a multitude of actor A and B power contests, highly situational and changeable, negotiating among diverse actors. Following the work of Carstensen and Schmidt, I can distinguish three ideal types of power relations: coercive, institutional, and ideational. First, vertical top-down interactions among superior and subordinate actors create coercive power relations. The situational acknowledge ability to mobilize resources and distributes rewards or punishments gives one actor power to promote preferred changes. Formal authority, protected knowledge, and access to resources are the main power differentials grounded in an institution's vertical organizational structure. Second, beside the vertical coercion, horizontal cross-institutional interactions of actors create institutional power relations. Every institutional field acknowledges its specialists and professionals that hold dominion over social problems, for which solutions institutions has crystallized. Formal institutional arrangements and the authority of professionals and specialists who have proved their ability to solve or prevent a recognized problem allow only selected actors to participate in policy making. The mobilization of bias, agenda setting, and gatekeeping are the main components of competition among actors. Third, ideational power relations are neither mainly vertical nor horizontal, but diagonal and spread throughout the institutional structure. The competition among actors takes place in the form of restructuralizing actors' interest and affecting other actors' everyday beliefs, ideas, directly through persuasion or imposition, or indirectly by influencing the structuration of thoughts. Why is this conception of power important for research on policy engagement? Current research on policy practice in social work reveals an array of normative and technical aspects of this type of intervention. We can read books and articles suggesting how to do it. We can learn about good practices and exemplar cases of exceptional workers. In my feeling, there is a gap residing in the depth of understanding of what is going on during the formulation of policies. We should delve into suitable concepts and aspects of politics. The suggested conception of power shows what we actually do not know about social workers' potential success or failure during their engagement in policymaking. There are just a few questions for illustration. What configuration of power differentials is good or bad for what situation? What conversion factors allow the rising of power to promote changes? What configuration of coercive, institutional, and ideational power relations support what changes in what context? These and many other similar questions can push research on policy engagement further. Moreover, suppose we want to prepare future social workers as policy actors who are routinely engaged in politics. In that case, we have to have a suitable conceptual frame for thinking about promoting changes. The demanding social work political role can be fulfilled if, and only if, we have a rich and proper conceptual gear. Thank you for your time. This is a draft on which basis I create my presentation. And this is bibliography, and it's all.
Thank you very much, Roman. I can see that this you've expanded on the paper that you sent me 2 weeks ago, because this was new information. You know, the last diagram, right, with ideational, institutional, coercive, all relations. So a lot of new material, basically, what I'm saying from the paper I saw. So that makes more sense for me, basically, that you've added. I would suggest that this would be even more convincing if you actually, at the end, before you ask, you propose the questions from the end, right? What would, what's more conducive to policy change and so forth, right? That you, if you could, you'd give examples of, just to explain what you mean, right? So I think that would just make your paper more palatable, is just easier to take from purely conceptual to you know. So that's really my main feedback. Please add examples of what you mean.
Thank you for your suggestion. Yeah, you know, this is my theoretical work to create some suitable concept which I can use for further research. Yeah, so this piece is completely theoretical without any examples, but I can add some because it is closely connected to some practice, yeah, of social workers in policy arenas. So sure, thank you.
So just like, you know, theoretical examples, right? That's what I'm saying. Like whenever you present, you say, well, for example, if this particular thing it needs to happen, this is how it will look, right? So again, theoretical examples. Any other comments?
I do have a question, and I probably missed it. The conversion, you talked about power symbols and then the conversion factor, and then you asked a question about the conversion factor. What did you mean by conversion factors?
Yeah, I mean convergence factor in sense meaning. Yeah, as a Sen created the concept of conversion factor as events or aspects of reality which are helpful to start functioning of something. Yeah. So, for example, particular mix of appropriate or suitable aspects of reality which support creation of power. Yeah. This is theoretical construction. In reality, it might be maybe some opportunity which is created by a change in the law, for example, yeah, and some gap of or insecurity of some people who are not secure in what their role might be. And after that, if you as a social worker negotiate with somebody who is insecure on his position, it is a really good opportunity to promote your ideas and to gain power in that situation, yeah, to power to change something. Yeah? So conversion factor is suitable or supporting aspects of reality which gives opportunity to your attributes to create your power.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
So in a way, the windows of opportunity that Osvaldo was talking about.
Yeah, it might be windows of opportunity, yeah, but it's a different conception. Just.
Right. But Simmer's question brings up again how giving theoretical examples, even in parentheses, like just, a sentence, a few words would just make it more clear what you mean, basically. So think of those as making your work so much stronger so that everybody understands.
Thank you. I will.
Any other comments and questions?
Yeah, actually, I have just a comment. Have you read have you looked at the book Street Level Bureaucracy? It's a big book in the public administration literature.
Lipsky.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating in that area. And yeah, it just kind of reminded me of that and the extraordinary sort of amount of power that flows from administrative discretion.
Yeah.
So,
But sometimes as a social workers, we are we negotiate with people for whom our street level discretion is not important. Yeah. Sometimes we must think to another opportunities or concepts which we can use when we are thinking about power. Yeah, because street level bureaucracy is something which gives us power. Our interactions with people who are in problems gives us some ascendancy over problem. Yeah, and with this ascendancy gives us the power to negotiate with somebody. But it is important just for somebody, not for everybody. Yeah, this is my reaction just for this street level discretion and so on. Yeah, and thank you. It is really important to me, and I read it, and it's really amazing book.
yeah. No, yes, yeah. Thank you, but very interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Roman. And next we have Marco.
Yes. Let's see how I share the screen here. Okay. All right. Does everybody see the screen here?
Yes, if you can make
Make
it
it large.
bigger slideshow.
Okay. Actually, now I gotta get this a little smaller here. Okay. All right. So thank you, everyone. Nice to see everybody here and sort of see everybody out, but not really out. Again, the topic that I have here, the subject here is about the interaction between technology and public administration and public policy making. Again, the paper titled One Step Forward and Two Steps Back, a study on the use of legacy and modern technologies in public deliberation on policy issues. I think I can make this a little bigger here. Just to give everybody an abstract and an overview on this, technology, information communication technologies, again, as we all know, we're using them now. I mean, even in just a short period of time, if you look back 10 years, the degree to which things have changed, it's pretty remarkable. But it's become a big part of our lives. It's become an increasingly important part of policy making, because these technologies are sort of pathways by which people can participate in public policy processes. During the 1.0 era of the internet, the Web 1.0, the so-called Web 1.0 era, these technologies were simpler, right? Email, discussion forums, sort of things like that were the primary way by which the public could communicate when it was utilized with the government to participate in government. And we'll look at that a little bit, as we go forward. But during this Web 2.0 era, right, the technologies have changed remarkably. They offer more dynamic sort of possibilities for communications, which changed the way that these technologies, of course, can be used. While these technologies are often seen as evolutions and improvements over the Web 1.0 predecessors, I posit that today's technologies should be seen as distinct technologies with features giving them both advantages and disadvantages when serving as mechanisms for public participation. So I discuss these differences and offer a set of propositions that I'm working on using different, sort of methodologies. I'm sort of planning about how I'm going to go about answering these questions But they're important because they give us insights on the potential of these technologies as conduits for public participation. Just to look a little bit about the history here. Again, given the ubiquity of technology today in our lives, it's difficult to recognize its growth. Um, Yet, because the use of ICTs, of information communication technology, is fairly new. It's hard to believe, but the mass smartphone adoption is relatively recent. If I had to look at a specific point in history, it was probably that first iPhone commercial, right? If I would have invested in that then, I'd be very wealthy. Um, but it really was the iPhone that came up around 2007. By 2010 is when adoption really started. So not ancient history, right? It's relatively recent. Former President Barack Obama was still considered the first internet president, even though, again, and now information communication technology in many forms is just taken over. It's in terms of both politics and administration. It's almost everywhere. Um, so again, it's important that we appreciate this evolution. Um, Now it's used for so many civilian purposes, right? When we think of the internet, we think about civilian purposes, shopping, uh, communications with people, right, amongst us. But just a little, background, just to, to go through the history a little bit. It did start as a government project, as a project of the U.S. Department of Defense, the ARPANET project. So it was used to create this communication network that was resistant to foreign attack. In 1982, the ARPANET uh, network adopted TCP/IP, the communications protocols that allowed more computers and different types of computers to operate on this network of computers, of interconnected computers. And this was democratized even further in the 1990s when the World Wide Web emerged, and really that sort of simple technology of HTML, of computers linking to one another, was so important in making the internet navigable. And really, after that is where the internet became much more of a consumer product, right? And some of you might remember CompuServe and whatnot, AOL, where the internet became something that all the people used, and that the government also would use for purposes of communicating with the public. Again, during the 1.0 era, these communications with the public were simpler. They were presentations of information, perhaps filing taxes, perhaps filing for licenses, but these simpler sort of interactions with the government. In the 2000s, once computers, again, it's just the rate of progress is pretty impressive. You could have more sophisticated dynamic communications with the government, allowing these technologies to be used for democratic purposes, for participation, often in public policy and decision making. Technologies such as public participation, geographic information systems, which allowed people to participate in planning in local development projects, and of course other technologies, discussion forums, wikis, blogs. There was an organization called America Speaks that would utilize technology to facilitate in-person discussion forums and sort of these events. So it was an interesting experimental period in terms of these technologies in the earlier 2000s. But as we know, these technologies have been superseded by the use of these big social media platforms. They become dominant players, virtually ubiquitous today, whether it's our own use or it's used by governments to facilitate public participation and communicate with the public, to aid in policy development, to gauge public sort of feelings on public service delivery and quality and so forth. And well supported in much of the literature. As I look through the literature in the academic world, right, it's seen as a good thing, right? I don't know, it seems almost like a truism, but it's just much of the literature seems to support the use of social media. I have several quotes here. social media is an important mechanism for enabling open governments. Social media provides more opportunities for citizens to collectively deliberate on public policy making, and the role of citizens in governance. Social media helps reconnect ordinary people with politics and policy making, making the decision-making processes easier to understand. And it's been associated with improved public services, improved administration, and improved social value in the outputs and outcomes of government. So very positive, generally speaking. But just as an observer and I enjoy technology. One of the apparent shortcomings I see in some of this literature, at least, is the generic fashion in which social media is used. The term social media is used as a monolithic term for information communication technologies that can be very different from one another. Academic research, news reports, and our own experience with these technologies illustrate differences, right? Important differences. And these differences can have an impact on the nature of the communications that flow from these technologies, which then have implications for their utilization and the value that they can bring to the public administrative realm. So basic research questions that I'm working on, and I've got looking at different ways of answering these questions. But the questions, some of them, how does the choice of social media tool affect the nature of the communications of citizens when they utilize these tools to participate in online deliberations on public policy matters? Just sort of I don't know, just sort of personal question I sort of have. When I see the academic literature, again, it's saying that social media is a good thing. I sort of wonder how these technologies themselves may be shaping the communications, and perhaps aiding in the democratic purposes of public participation, or poisoning the well, or all sorts of things in between. And I just believe that more nuanced answers to these questions, it's important that we get them and that we investigate them. If there are differences in the communications, what are the implications for the decisions that public administrators make regarding the types of tools they utilize? Right? If there's a better knowledge and empirical knowledge, they could shape the way that public administrators use these tools. And what are the implications for how public administrators should use and interpret their communications when seeking to draw meaningful conclusions? Right? It could be that these tools may be good or bad for different purposes, but that being able to interpret these tools or interpret the communications may be key in using these tools effectively. Again, so just some propositions for testing. Citizen communications on public policy issues in a set topical area expressed on microblogging platforms will exhibit more polarity than on platforms utilizing a discussion forum interface. This is where I see the split between more modern communications platforms, the microblogging platforms like Twitter, and more traditional discussion forums, that sort of interface. And again, the brief nature of microblogging communications, I believe, are likely to prompt expressions that are simpler, unnuanced, and leading to expressions with greater polarity. And there are methods to measure these sorts of things. Natural language processing is a technology I've been looking into, where you can measure these things and see them objectively, even though I think many of us sort of have this intuitive sense that is going on, but it may not be going on to any different degree on different platforms. So it'd be important to look at this. Citizen communications expressed on microblogging platforms will exhibit more negative sentiment in the same topical area on platforms than on platforms utilizing a discussion forum interface. Again, in addition to polarity, which is sort of I could be positive sentiment or negative sentiment, I'm arguing that there will be more negative sentiment. And we know that underlying a lot of these technologies, there are these algorithms that emphasize polarized and even toxic content that nevertheless drive user engagement, right? In the journalism world, they say if it bleeds, it leads, right? And I think in a lot of these social media platforms, this toxic content nonetheless drives user engagement. And this will, I think, will prime the user to having this kind of cognitive experience with the platform, and then resulting in more negative communications on these platforms relative to something like a discussion forum. And again, important that that any kind of research study in this area would have to look at same sort of similar policy domains, similar policy areas, in order to really make any kind of extrapolation. And number 3, citizen communications on public policy issues expressed on microblogging platforms will exhibit more subjectivity in the same topical area than communications expressed on platforms utilizing a discussion forum interface. And again, subjectivity is something that can be measured through some of these natural language processing methodologies. And again, I think that the brief nature of communications on some of these platforms could prompt users in this direction of expressing subjective feelings about things, rather than discussion that is more objectively based. And again, and the relevance, I noted it before, addressing these questions can shed light on important issues surrounding the adoption of social media for public participation, especially in an environment where it is seen as pretty uniformly good. Given the popularity and support for the utilization of social media tools for fostering public participation, it's important that we develop more granular knowledge about how we can best utilize these tools for the accomplishment of democratic objectives. And findings from this research will help illuminate questions as to how social media can benefit efforts towards fostering public participation, as well as how in some instances it may obstruct the goals of these processes. So we want to make sure we know what we are doing. Again, there are differences in these tools, and it's important that we recognize these differences to make better choices about what tool to utilize, how to interpret data gathered when we're using different tools, and perhaps as a basis for forming new tools. Right? We so often we get stuck on certain technologies that become so dominant, but perhaps knowledge coming from this field can help us either form new tools or utilize tools that we currently have in more creative ways and combinations. And yeah, that's it's basically the research plan that I have, and I'm looking at different methodologies. Again, natural language processing, perhaps surveys, or sort of case study methodologies. There's several ways to go about this. So thank you. And
Thank you very much, Marco. Fascinating topic, of course, especially with what's been happening in the US, presidential elections, COVID, now Ukraine. I appreciated your comments about the subjectivity, right, of the polarity of microblogging. And I was going to ask, but you answered my question, like, what are the implications? What's the relevance? And I particularly appreciated, the idea of potentially creating new tools, right, that would still drive user engagement, but it would limit some of those clear, obvious disadvantages, right? And your title is perfect. 1 step forward, 2 steps back. I would, I know this is just kind of like the beginning, right, of your work, and it's ongoing. But I would just emphasize more the last part, like the what is the implication, right? Which is to again, to create new tools or find better ways to promote, right, engagement, but not in such a polarized way. So, I would just stress and perhaps detail like potential ways to do so, right? And then, of course, you can actually measure that, you know, and for sure, like, you know, I'm thinking focus groups would probably give you answers to how to, you know, to develop new tools or find better ways of engaging with the existing tools.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Thank you for that comment. And it just sort of made me think. Yeah, once these big platforms sort of became so big, there was an interesting time period. Almost like an adolescence, perhaps, of technology in the early 2000s, where you had all this weird innovation by today's standards, right? Because today's social media is one or two or three big platforms, but there were a lot of weird sort of things that went on in between 2000, perhaps in 2010, technologies that arose and just fizzled away. Um, and I like your emphasis on, yeah, perhaps really going out there and proposing what new platforms would need. Even if I don't develop a new technology or something, I'd like to,
Right.
Twitter. But what would in governmental areas, what is needed? And perhaps we're all from psychology. What do people cognitively need in order to make good decisions in public policy?
And in order to engage, as opposed to, I mean, in a primitive way here, I'm explaining, but people are attracted to what's easy, right? Twitter, Facebook, you post things, you're not inviting discussion, right? It's kind of like, and then you seek what? Validation, right? So, I mean, from the very beginning, it's missing the point of conversation and being objective, right? You are there being subjective, seeking validation, right? So it's not really a forum, it's not really participative, right? So when people comment on your posts, on your tweets, it's just to say something good or bad, right? So it's praise or negativity, right? So it's kind of like doomed from the start. So I would emphasize I would emphasize ways in which we can promote the same user engagement, but again, decrease this polarity and subjectivity. And any other comments? Any other? Please, Osvaldo.
Yeah, this is a fascinating topic. I'm not an expert, but I understand you're taking a critical perspective on whether the adoption of certain technologies are conducive to its outcomes, especially regarding social media. And I was wondering if it could be helpful regarding one of your going a bit of steps back and taking also a critical look at what could be a truism, which is whether there has been an increased adoption of these technologies and at what level. Because in your presentation, that sort of was a given, and maybe some figures about rates of adoption, about particular kinds of technologies, whether these technologies are adopted at a specific level of government. Because again, I'm not an expert, neither an economist nor into IT, but I've been reading certain arguments regarding the fact that IT productivity raises may be inflated, that their potential, in increasing productivity might be a bit inflated. And so sort of taking that same critical look you're taking afterwards in the first place and assessing whether it is a truism or some figures really back up this notion that it is. I get that we have this feeling that it is pervasive and it is everywhere, but sort of put something to help the reader sort of grapple whether it is in fact happening.
Yeah, and how? Yeah, in more detail. Well, thank you. That's a good. Yeah, very. I've kind of thought about that too. Is all this stuff really worth it? Right? Is it maybe not just in democratic procedures, but in all of our lives? Like I see all these like hacks and so forth. I'm like, that didn't happen before in the 1980s, and somehow life went on. And should we really have pipelines connected to like the internet, and so forth?
And I might be biased because of the fact that I was trying to set an IRS profile online and failed miserably for 4 or 5 times. So I might not be as supportive of IT at this time.
How did we do it before?
But great paper. Thanks.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Thank you very much, Marco.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Next we have Jay. Am I pronouncing your name right?
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Perfect.
Okay, my name is Jaebong Lee. I will share my screen.
Marco, if you could stop sharing your screen. Excellent. Yes, we can see it now. Perfect.
Okay.
Perfect.
Hi, hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Jaebong Lee. I'm assistant professor, Gyeongsang National University in South Korea. Here are the contents of my presentation today. I will begin by introduction and theoretical framework, and I explain the context of Korea public child care that I'm interested in this paper with the data and method, and I discuss finding with the conclusion. Okay, let's get started. As we all know, the citizen satisfaction is an important service performance indicator because it gives us a very good insightful feedback to the public, bureaucrats, and politicians about the effectiveness of service provision. However, many questions remain unanswered regarding how citizens arrive their assessment in the current public service provision. That has to do with current public service delivery's recent change. Currently, government has harnessed the nature of economic pressure, great choices, and competition between diverse service providers. Therefore, the term public service organization was redefined any organization that can be located within public, nonprofit, or for-profit sectors. Against this backdrop, here is my research goal as follows. To understand the complicated process of citizen satisfaction, I would like to propose a new concept of citizen expectation of a public service organization and exploring a path in which the proposed expectation shape citizen satisfaction by measuring the concept of expectation less cognitively. Then let's move on to the theoretical framework. Take a look at this graph. It's called expectancy disconfirmation model that explains citizen satisfaction is based on the comparison of performance with some adapted standard like a prior expectation. However, studies repeatedly produce inconclusive results on the relationship between expectation and satisfaction that relate to the impractical assumption that citizen expectation is exogenous to the experience of services, or the expectation from the survey question may entail cognitive bias. Recent studies utilize the experimental design method. However, they confirm again the complicated process of this confirmation process, and they highlighted the direct role of citizen expectation is growing. So to more understand the citizen satisfaction process, the first goal of my research is to build on the concept of expectation of a public service organization. Currently, citizens do not receive a given service from the government. They receive a services by choosing a specific public service organization. So I would like to suggest desired expectation as defined by the level of performance that citizens want to or hope to receive out of a given set of comparable choices. And to stimulate further thought on desired expectation and distinguish it from the predictive expectation that was previously discussed as the level of performance or quality of service will be, I looked up the literature and I found the expectation lies in a hierarchical sequences. For example, normative expectation that is defined the level of performance should be was found to be set higher than predictive expectation. So here are my hypotheses. First, citizens who have a predictive expectation are more satisfied with the public service organization than those who do not have, because predictive expectations are reflected of previous performance objectively. So I would like to say that first hypothesis, and my second hypothesis is citizens who have desired expectation are less satisfied with a predictive public service organization than those who do not have, because it's probably set higher than predictive expectation, I guess. And let's move on to the second goal of my research, to explore the route from the citizen expectation to citizen satisfaction in specific contexts. To deepen the conceptual understanding of the relationship between citizen expectation and citizen satisfaction, as a one specific context, I would like to suggest references. Citizens prefer public sector organization because they are legally prohibited from the disputing private. So citizens prefer public ones compared to the private ones. So I'd like to say, as a third hypothesis, citizens who have a desired expectation for public sector are much less satisfied with the private public service organization than those who have a desired expectation for private sectors. And second context will be the service component. As we already know, public service has a diversity, multiple components in it. So we can divide this service component of service providers by two components, which are internal components and external components. And I would say the internal components is more related, quality related attribute, and is hard to difficult to observe. So my first hypothesis, when the service component is internal, citizens who have a desired expectation are much less satisfied compared to the when service is an external. And my fifth hypothesis, when the service components in the internal compared to the rather than the external, desired expectation are more related to the citizen satisfaction than predictive expectation. So let's move on to the context. In Korea, the government implemented a universal free childcare program since 2011. Since then, external private sector organizations automatically participated in this program. So as you can see in this graph, the majority of providers complies private sector organizations, over 94.6 to 91 in 2018. And also there exists the concern about private providers could undercut the quality of public childcare services. Now I will just explain the data and method. I obtained the data from the National Survey of Childcare and Early Childhood Education that was conducted by governments in 2015 and 2018. And I will use multivariable regression when I use overall satisfaction measured by summation of below 9 items as a dependent variable. Then next, I use ordinal logistic regression when analyzing external or internal service components respectively, as which is measured by a 5-point scale. And in terms of the explanatory variable, which is citizen expectation, for measuring predictive expectation, the question is used to ask, is there a sufficient number of trusted child care facility near your current residence? And desired expectation is measured by the question. Ask, have you ever been awaiting listed to enroll your children in the facility? And third, perceived performance is measured by the question asked, what do you think about current monthly tuition for child care facility? And as a control variable, I include market and other attributes and provide their attributes and household attribute as well. And let's move on to what I found. Here's a graph. Left side is about the predictive expectation. As you can see, citizens who have a predictive expectancy, which is dashed line, is higher than those who doesn't have a predictive expectation. This side is the citizen expectations. And regarding the desired expectation, we can see those who have a desired expectation dashed line is below. Under the line, solid line, which measured those who has not desired expectation. So lower the expectation. And take a look this table from the multivariable regression. As you can see, we can see predictive expectation is positively related to citizen satisfaction. However, we can see desired expectation became negative expectations when include these control variables. So I think that my hypothesis 1 and 2 is supported by this finding. Citizens who have a predictive expectation more satisfied with service providers than those who do not have. And second one is inverse direction is also supported. And let's move on to the second findings. As we can see, I divided these references, which are public and private desire. And those citizens who have a desired expectation for public sector are much less satisfied with the providers than those who have desired expectation for private sectors. So my third hypothesis is supported by this finding, I think. And this one is ordinary logistic analysis when using the internal and external service component as a dependent variable. And as you can see, the result is the same, but we can see this internal service component is internal. The citizen more likely to less satisfied with it compared to the external component. So I would like to say citizens who have desired expectation are much less satisfied when internal service components. And these desire expectation are more relate to the citizen satisfaction than predictive expectation when service components internal. We can see insignificant in this coefficient. I think that the internal service component is very hard to evaluate attributes. So the predictive expectation is based on the calculation of that previous performance usually. So it's hard to, it's less effective, I think, than compared to the external component. But in this case, desire expectation more influence on this satisfaction. So I think that's it, or my presentation today. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. I appreciated very much the empirical nature of the work and the statistical analysis. I appreciated the conceptual difference between desired expectations and predictive expectations. And it just made me realize it doesn't just apply to public sector organizations and how we measure performance with public sector services, but to everything else in life, right? We're basically saying that people who have predictive, let's call them rational, if you will, expectations are going to be, generally speaking, more satisfied than people who have desired expectations, kind of like an image of what they want things to be, right? And if you have that image, you're more likely to be disappointed. So again, it just made me realize this again applies to everything else in life. I had a question about how you measured performance with public sector services. I saw an indicator variable measuring satisfaction with tuition, perceived performance. Correct. This is the slide. What do you think of the current monthly tuition for childcare facility? And I would just recommend that you either acknowledge that as a limitation or you explain why you chose that, because I'm just not sure this is the best way to measure my satisfaction with performance of in this case, the childcare facility. I mean, they could be doing a tremendous job that I could be very satisfied with, but I could still be upset that they charge so much money, right? So again, I'm just not sure this is the right way to measure performance. And finally, my comment would be that it would be fascinating and more robust statistically to actually do a path analysis and employ structural equation modeling to look at these variables as concepts, latent variables, and see how basically how the arrows go, right? How the covariance is like how exactly all these indicator variables affect each concept, each latent variable, right? And so forth. Amos, right? We use Amos for that. But again, I applaud the empirical work on this. Any comments, any feedback, any suggestions, any questions from the other presenters?
Okay, okay. Can
Yeah.
I answer your question?
Oh, please, sorry.
And I think that's very insightful comments. I think that because perceived performance in this case, I use this question about the tuition because actually the previous literature, the question used, what do you think about the performance? Ask just the performance because the perception about the performance is cognitive. So that's the point about the problem of previous literature, because the cognitive bias make it positively related perceived performance, and the satisfaction is very correlated.
Absolutely.
So yeah, so that is one
Because perceived
problems. Yeah.
because perceived performance is undoubtedly a subjective measure, basically. So I completely understand that, and I agree. But I'm just not sure, and I would explore further whether moving to the opposite end of the extreme. Like, I understand the bias of subjective measures, but I'm just not sure that moving to the opposite extreme of using, satisfaction with tuition truly measures, performance per se. So I would just explore the range between the two.
Yeah, that exists a gap between this tuition, but what I want to try to see is that in this case, it's universal free child care. So it's just without a charge. Nobody pays on these services. When children go to the public child care service, child care facility, they do not pay at all in Korea. So regardless their income status or income level, under the age of 5, you can get these services freely. So I would say that the tuition is identical. So they might have, when someone positively perceive their performance, they probably less financial burden, less burden, feel physically, financially, less burden. So I think that if they perceive of quality is highly qualified services, they would answer it's less burden, or it's not a problem. The current monthly tuition is not a problem, but
I
somebody
understand.
has a burden, feel like a burden, but I alternative measured. I admit it's not a perfect, but it's another way to measure it.
Absolutely. So I would just explain that in the paper. I would clarify how does this play into your data analysis, considering the childcare is free. So I would just to make sure that the audience is not confused. Well, if it's free, why am I having a question on what do people think about the tuition? If it's free. So I would clarify that. And I would also clarify what you just explained further, just for clarification purposes.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Thank you very much. And last but certainly not least, we have Simmer Singh.
Thank you, appreciate it. Am I able to share, or?
If you could please stop sharing, Jay.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Can y'all see?
Not yet. Are you sharing?
How about now?
Absolutely. Perfect. Thank you very much. You can start.
Thank you. I guess good morning my time, folks. Appreciate the opportunity. My name is Simmer Singh. Really, I'm looking forward to some constructive feedback here, particularly looking at trying to find some formal academic framework for some of this work that I've done. Again, I'll keep improving on it. Currently, I'm teaching. I'm an Army officer teaching economics and finance at the United States Military Academy. Partially due to my previous unit assignment, and then I'll talk about that. I have this interest in how U.S. military responds to domestic operations, whether it's disasters, any kind of special events requiring military support, and particularly, National Guard is such a large part of that U.S. military's domestic homeland mission. I decided to focus on National Guard versus active duty forces or reserve forces that are controlled by the U.S. federal government, whereas National Guard units are essentially, for lack of a better word, they're state-owned armies by each of the U.S. states. Let's go next. Primarily, really, what this paper uses is it's what is the current framework. I looked at the current framework for these responses, these domestic homeland mission responses. I looked at the historical responses, pulled some of my own experience to get a better understanding and maybe make some recommendations on improving the process. As I mentioned, I was part of the 249th Engineer Battalion. I'll talk about it a little bit more, but it's a very unique unit, one of a kind. It's in the Army that had dual missions, right? Supporting the federal, the active duty Army, but also supporting disaster relief missions here, working with FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency. The focus of my, inquiry is two friction points. One is the deployment authority of these various National Guard units. Do they fall underneath federal deployment or state? And then the funding of those deployments. And to a certain extent, both of those are related as we go on. Hopefully that'll become clear. Again, motivation, as we continue, it seems like because of climate change, disaster declarations are becoming more prominent. We went from, in the 1950s in the US, of having about 100 disaster declarations by FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, to 22,000 in the 2010s, right? And so increasingly this is becoming something of more importance. And then obviously, with increased tribalism, social unrest, National Guard is being also deployed for security and law enforcement purposes as well in the U.S. Historically, the deployment to Hurricane listed right there in 2005, Hurricane Katrina, things didn't go as well as they probably could have. Particularly, it took 9 days after the president declared a disaster declaration. Took 9 days for DoD to approve National Guard under Title 32, which I'll go into a little bit what that means, but Title 32 authority, essentially getting DoD's blessing for funding, Department of Defense. And then in 2012, Hurricane Sandy, fairly large, another large storm that hit the East Coast. The general theme was, hey, we need to improve the Department of Defense's assignment and activation of National Guard units. And then in 2017, that's the hurricane season, we had three large hurricanes, one of them devastating Puerto Rico, the island of Puerto Rico. And I was actually directly involved with that response. And again, the theme was, and I was working at the time, the unit for a Corps of Engineers, a large agency within the U.S. Army. We were struggling, or like actually the senior National Guard leadership were struggling on figuring out how to appropriately and timely deploy National Guard units. The time I was with my unit 249th Engineer Battalion, and we were active duty. We were under federal control, but we, Puerto Rico and some of the other devastating areas, Texas, they were requesting for National Guard support. You can see here kind of the larger picture of domestic responses in the U.S., really capturing the three large buckets of domestic military missions. There's the Homeland Security mission that's towards the bottom there in almost yellow, orange. And it falls underneath the purview of Department of Homeland Security missions, things like border security, terrorism prevention, and disaster relief. And again, I mentioned FEMA, that's the primary agency in the US responsible for disaster key agency, and they fall on, under Department of Homeland Security. As an example, sometimes you may, if you come into the airports here in the US, you might see some National Guard soldiers. They fall underneath this Homeland Security mission, and they are working for Department of Homeland Security. The second bucket is Department of Defense. That's like that purple at the top, and that's where DoD has a key lead. An example of this would be NORAD, right? Strategic defense over U.S. skies, missile defense over U.S. skies. That mission squarely falls underneath Department of Defense's purview. And active duty federal military forces are in charge of performing, for the most part, performing that mission. Where the gray area is, or I guess it's blue here, is this idea of defense support of civil authority. Many of the disaster relief missions end up falling there, or many of the National Guard deployments for disaster relief end up falling into this idea of defense support of civil authority. In the concept, it's where essentially DoD is giving forces, resources really, to Homeland Security that kind of don't directly belong to DoD, right? So now you have this DoD being part of this system, or this a process when they don't even control the resources that they are, or directly control the resources that they are lending out. And particularly the way DISCA, again, that middle defense support of civil authority, the way DoD defines it is support provided by U.S. federal military forces, DoD personnel, and National Guard in response to requests for assistance from civil authorities for domestic emergencies, law enforcement support, and other domestic activities. And it's that National Guard piece, which again, it's National Guard forces are owned by states, not by the federal government. But a lot of times they end up getting their funding from the federal government. And so that partly is the reason that there is sometimes that friction of command authority and funding. The larger DISCA mission, this defense support to civil authority, falls underneath what we have is called the National Response Framework. The framework really, it lays out the structure and the procedures that need to be kept up to date to be able to provide specific resources, capabilities, and any kind of coordination for each incident. It's meant to be a bottom-up, flexible approach where resources and the response starts at the local level, goes to the state level, and goes to the federal level, with the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, being overall control, or I guess the providing the implementation of this framework. As you can see, kind of towards the bottom there, there's operations, intelligence, planning, logistics, finance. Those are kind of the sections within the framework that provide continuing support and make sure, whether it's resources or training is happening. And then there at the very bottom, you see the emergency support function. These are essentially support expertise, whether it's logistics, whether it's public works, right? Emergency support function 3, public works. And there's lead agencies within the U.S. government that are in charge of these various support functions. I think there's 11 or 12 of them right now, with, again, specific responsibility and expertise to disaster or incident responses. As you can see, this chart on this slide, there's a lot, right? It's a behemoth task of bringing multitude of organizations together. In addition to this, the framework itself relies on some very specific legal frameworks, specifically the Stafford Act, which is a legal authority that allows federal assistance in terms of funding to be provided to state and local authorities, and the Economy Act, which allows from one federal agency to request and get support from another federal agency and be reimbursed. So there are points of legal constraint on how funding is done in this larger response framework. And then moving on to within this framework, how is the National Guard activated, right? So the National Guard, again, a state level asset, primarily activated bottom-up approach. Local authorities make a request. The state governors, with advice from the Adjutant General, which is essentially the general officer in charge of the guard at the state level, make a determination if they're able to handle the situation on their own with their own guard forces, or if they need to request external support, whether it's from a neighboring state or from the federal government. If the state decides that their forces are enough, they can activate their forces. Again, I guess step back. National Guard, most of them are not full-time soldiers. They're part-time soldiers and are activated on a need basis, or they do routine training maybe once 1 week in a month or 2 weeks out of the year. So they're not. Most of them are not full-time soldiers. So they can activate the Guard under what's called state active duty authority, where the National Guard both funds and has command authority. If they determine that they need assistance from outside, they can ask for DOD and presidential activation, which is known as Title 10, right? Title 10 is where the President, Department of Defense fully take federal control of these National Guard units and fully fund them. And then the third way, which is a more hybrid way of activating these troops, is called Title 32 authority. And you can see that on the slide there. Essentially, National Guard is in control of the state authorities, the state governor, the state general, but is funded by the federal government, funded by Department of Defense. So again, states always limited on funds. Generally, when disasters happen, governors are hesitant to activate their own National Guard under their own authority and prefer to use the federal, prefer to do Title 32 activation and prefer to go through that route, the DOD activation route, which can be a lengthy process and can cause unnecessary delays. And really that graphic there, you can see kind of towards the bottom, that title T32, Title 32 is when things kind of go into that DSCA, Defense Support of Civil Authority realm, versus staying in the Homeland Security realm. And here on this slide, the department or the mission assignment, I'm just putting it up here for the sake of highlighting how complex or how many gates you have to go through to get a mission assignment, to get a process completed. So when a request goes through, it has to go all the way from local to various agencies within DOD before it can even be approved. Keep in mind that National Guard is, it's a reserve force of the DOD, right? So not only is it primarily state asset, but DOD uses it to backfill active duty full-time soldiers. So oftentimes whenever National Guard folks train and they're funded for the training, it's primarily through Department of Defense funds, right? And so understandably, Department of Defense prioritizes the use of National Guard for in their mind, the primary mission of supporting active duty forces rather than supporting Homeland Security missions. So they'll always vet that. And sometimes National Guard elements are busy performing Department of Defense, Homeland Defense missions. And the other issue that Department of Defense runs into is not getting reimbursed, right? So technically, they're supposed to, anytime that they provide funding for disaster relief, they're supposed to be reimbursed by state or through the Stafford Act disaster declaration. That doesn't always end up happening. So whenever these missions come, Department of Defense is really careful and thinks through considerably on how the funding is going to go. Contrary to the unpredictable nature of the National Guard responding to Homeland missions, there are dedicated units that exist, right? There you have on the left side the Weapons of Mass Destruction Civil Support Team, the Homeland Response Force, and the Chemical, Biological, Radiological, and Nuclear Enhanced Response Force package. Right? Those teams they're made up of National Guard units. Two of them, the teams vary from 52 teams to 10 teams, and some of them are full-time, fully activated, but they're all part of National Guard. And two of them are funded under Title 32 authority. So again, funded by the federal government, but are under state control. And then one of them is under federal control. There on the right-hand side is the 249th Engineer Battalion. That's what I was part of. It's an active duty component or active duty unit, but one of their primary missions, as I mentioned before, is to support federal emergency management with power generation, right? So anytime disaster damages power infrastructure, this unit goes in with giant generators to support critical facilities like hospitals, water stations, anything that is critical for life. They hook up generators while power is being restored. And so this unit has experience working with, all these units have experience responding to disasters. And they're always around. They don't have this idea of where their primary mission is something else, or there's any kind of conflict between what the primary missions can be. So I think these units can be a model for what more National Guard units can look like in terms of disaster relief in the homeland. Really, the two recommendations I would have is, again, those units that I just mentioned, they have permanent funding for them. There is designated permanent funding. And so my two recommendations would be, hey, dedicate permanent units under Title 32 authority, where they don't have to continuously go through this process through Department of Defense. They're automatically under that authority, and dedicate funding for these units. There was starting in 1990, Congress had a Defense Emergency Response Fund that was meant to provide funding for unforeseen DoD support to disasters. It ended up being primarily used for terrorism items in the U.S., and there was some abuse of the fund, and it was discontinued. I think a fund like that needs to be brought back with obviously stricter controls to be able to support and maintain these standing Homeland Defense missions or units. That is really all I have, and I'll take any questions now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Seymour. very timely and fascinating for me for two reasons. Number one, I'm actually part of the Medical Reserve Corps. So I'm well aware with the Incident Command Post Unified command system. I had to take courses to be certified. And secondly, I have students who have to drop courses every term or so because they're deployed unexpectedly. And it's a real big deal for them because, you know, it delays their graduation and their life goals and everything. I was not aware of this crazy multitude of steps and this so complicated process. I was also not aware before reading your paper, and you make an excellent point. It took 9 days, right? Back with Katrina, I mean, I would emphasize for your paper the cost of waiting. It's not just a conceptual argument you're making. Hey, this is not working. So I would just emphasize what it really means. I mean, of course, you can't really monetize that, but you could talk about, you know, you can't really quantify that, but try and make just stress further what it means is lost time, because that's really the problem, right? You're trying to address ultimately. So your proposals come to address that, to decrease the wait time, right? Because when disaster happens, we can't afford, right? And ultimately, more money are going to be spent if we wait, correct? So that's what you want to say. I think this is rich. This is timely. I think your proposals are on point. I would just consider in the paper what would be the barriers to make those things happen, you know, and discuss that. So really, this is my feedback. Again, to recap, emphasize and make sure it's very clear the time lost, right? And that's kind of like the biggest problem, right? And what it means when we're in disaster mood, and what it means for the future, right? Of disaster response, and then discuss the barriers and try to, while you discuss the challenges, to speculate on potential solutions to those challenges, right? How can this make it on the agenda and become, you know, be turned into a bill, right? Become law.
Thank you.
Any comments? Yes, Roman.
Yeah, I'm just curious. You know, you've depicted a really complex picture of links among diverse bodies, yeah? And to me, I've gained such an idea that it might be really messy in terms of authorities and competencies if something happened. And I'm wondering how all these links are formalized by law, or it is some voluntary collaboration among that bodies, or by budgeting, or I don't know. I'm just wondering about it.
Yeah, so a lot of them are formal agreements between organizations, agreements of support between organizations. You know, again, when my unit supported Federal Emergency Management Agency, it was a formal agreement between my higher headquarters, which was the Corps of Engineers, and the Federal Emergency Management Agency to provide that support. Now, that support, oftentimes, to answer your question, oftentimes support has some sort of dollar value tied to it with these agencies, and so that can also formalize that relationship, having some sort of a dollar value attached to it. And then, you know, what is the legal mission of, so Corps of Engineers, right? Their mission, and how Congress defines their mission also lent them to support federal emergency management agency. And then, you know, us falling underneath the legal command authority of Corps of Engineers, we were essentially tasked to support federal emergency management agency. So it's a combination of multiple things. And then the way you, to answer your other question, the way you kind of keep those relationships going is through practice, right? You have routine training exercises, even if it's just, you know, sitting at a table and working through if this happens, those routine annual exercises keep those relationships fresh.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other comments? I want to emphasize, Simmer, that this would be a fantastic piece in journals that are more, I mean, this is basically looking for proposing a very, like, you know, applied, right, solutions. So don't get stuck into the academic theory. I mean, there's so much room for what you bring in, and it's actually more important, everybody would agree, right? Especially since what you recognized in the beginning. I mean, we've entered an era of kind of like the National Guard being constantly deployed, right? From disasters to insurrection to, you know, I mean, you're really focusing on disasters, but it's become the go-to, right? So we do need writing on this and fixing this response times, right? And authority.
And we can't, you know, the national military, the active military can't be used in the US, right? By legal authority, we cannot do law enforcement actions under normal circumstances.
So thank you very much, Simmer. You know, very important for the times we're living now. And I think it has a great place being published. Absolutely, and well received. I want to thank everyone. We had a beautiful panel today. We had two of our presenters abroad, right? Czech Republic and South Korea. We had such an interesting bouquet, again, I'm going to use it, of papers, right? Applied, purely theoretical, statistical analysis, everything. So I feel very good about how this went. It's in the conference program. It will be streamed live. Forgive me, I forgot exactly when, but it's in the schedule. I will send you a link. And I thank you all. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to email me. And again, thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for this opportunity. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Have a nice day, everyone.
Have a nice day.
Have a good one.